I'm Carson Miller, 34, owner of a 3-bay auto shop where my knuckles stay split and my shirts smell like diesel. My life was set on cruise control. Decent business, fridge full of beer, a wife I thought I could trust. 8 months into marriage with Natalie Brooks, the dental hygienist who could sterilize a room with a smile, I figured the hard part of life was behind me. Turns out I was only warming up. It started on a Tuesday. She was cooking some half-seasoned chicken while I was at her laptop, trying to clean up her digital landfill. Folders everywhere, documents stacked like a scrapyard. She asked for help because I'm good with tools, wires, and bolts, whether they're under a hood or behind a screen. I clicked through what looked like old tax files when I saw it. A folder named Personal Stuff. Now, most guys would have respected the title, shut it, and walked away. But something about the way she glanced over her shoulder, spatula hovering mid-air, made me click. And there they were, ultrasound photos, fresh and shiny, stamped with her name. For one breathless minute, my brain short-circuited into joy. I saw nurseries. I saw tiny boots on the porch. I saw my parents calling with good news. Then I turned the screen toward her. The color drained from her face like someone yanked the plug on her. She dropped the spatula with a clang and whispered the line that knocked the air straight out of my lungs. "You're not the father." The room went silent, except for the hiss of the skillet burning dinner. My jaw tightened. My eyes stayed locked on hers, but my pulse slammed against my ribs like a piston about to crack. She rushed into words, trying to cushion the blow with speed, like ripping duct tape. His name, Hayden Walker, spilled out. Some old high school flame who'd blown back into town. A construction nomad with muscles, a truck, and apparently my wife's loyalty. I sat there, watching her lips move, and realized I was listening to a woman I didn't know. Every memory twisted in real time, late-night phone flips, early bedtimes, wellness excuses for skipping wine. The puzzle pieces fell into place with a click so sharp I swear I heard it. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I've rebuilt transmissions under pressure. I've cut steel with sparks flying 2 inches from my face. I know what it means to keep steady when the heat climbs. So I stayed calm, even as my stomach felt like it had swallowed broken glass. She tried to say things like, "It just happened," and "You don't understand." I cut her off with one sentence, my voice low and hard enough to make her flinch. "This didn't just happen. You chose it." Her eyes darted, searching for the version of me she'd known. The easygoing guy, the fixer, the man who'd bend before he'd break. But that man was gone. I closed the laptop, slid it across the table, and stood. The smell of burnt chicken filled the air. I walked past her without another word, grabbed my truck keys, and stepped out into the night. The slam of the door behind me wasn't rage. It was punctuation. Out on the road, the dashboard lights glowed against my knuckles gripping the wheel. The world blurred by in streaks of neon and taillights, but my mind was sharp. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to play second fiddle in my own marriage. Evidence doesn't lie, and I had all the evidence I needed. Natalie thought she'd rewritten the script of our life. What she didn't know was that I was done being her prop. This wasn't the end of my story, it was the ignition. The road swallowed me for 2 hours straight, headlights carving tunnels through the dark, while my truck's engine hummed like a lifeline. I didn't pick a route, I just drove. One highway bled into another, and every mile gave me more clarity. The first few minutes, I kept replaying that single spark of joy. The second I thought I was a father, before she torched it with 6 words. "You're not the father, Carson." After that, the reel flipped. Every scene I'd brushed off now screamed the truth. The flipped phone face down on the nightstand. The early-to-bed routine. They skipped a glass of wine because of a wellness reset. All of it snapped together like bolts on a frame. I'd ignored the rattle in the engine, and now the whole damn block had seized. When I finally pulled back into the driveway, the house looked the same. Porch light on, curtains drawn. The flower pot she insisted on painting teal last spring still chipped on the corner. But it felt like a stage set. Fake. Someone else's home. Inside, Natalie sat on the couch, hands folded, eyes wide and wet like she was auditioning for sympathy. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. She launched into the script, connection, history, passion. She said Hayden made her feel alive, like she was 20 again. She said what we had was comfortable but not electric. I let her talk until she ran out of adjectives. Then I gave her math instead of poetry. You didn't slip. You didn't trip. You didn't accidentally end up in his bed. You made a decision, then another, and another. You didn't find yourself. You chose him, over and over. Her face twitched, like I'd slapped her without moving an inch. She tried to pivot, said she still loved me in a way, that it didn't mean what we had wasn't real, that I could be part of this if I wanted. I stepped forward, voice steady enough to cut steel. No, you decided your path. You don't get to drag me down it. The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to choke on. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice, then nothing. She blinked at me, expecting maybe a blow-up, maybe a begging session. But I'd done both in other parts of life, and I knew this moment needed neither. I pointed at the stairs. Pack a bag. Her lip trembled. Carson, please. I cut her off. I said pack. She didn't move right away, and for a second I thought she might test me. But then she stood, shoulders caved in, and shuffled upstairs. The floor creaked under her weight. I stayed rooted where I was, listening to drawers slide and zippers drag. My hands wanted to shake, but I clenched them until they didn't. That's what control looks like. Anger caged, not spilling. 15 minutes later, she came down with a suitcase, eyes red, lips pressed tight. She paused at the door like she was waiting for me to say something. Maybe to offer forgiveness, maybe to fight for her. I opened the door instead. The night air rushed in. She stepped out, suitcase wheels crunching over gravel. The tail lights of her car faded down the street until the dark swallowed them whole. Inside, the house felt cavernous, quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, watching the steam curl. Tasted bitter, like regret, but also sharp enough to keep me awake. The kind of quiet that follows betrayal isn't peaceful. It's surgical, cuts you open and leaves you raw. But I knew something she didn't. That quiet is also where resolve starts to grow. Natalie had made her choice, and now I am making mine. The sun hadn't been up an hour when I parked my truck in front of Ron Barrett's law office. Ron's the kind of man who looks like he was born in a tie, square jaw, silver hair combed like a blueprint, not a crease out of place. He'd coached my brother's little league team back in the day, and rumor was he hadn't lost a case in the county in 10 years. If there was anyone I trusted to cut clean lines through this mess, it was him. I walked in carrying a manila folder with ultrasound printouts and a memory stick of photos from Natalie's laptop. Evidence, neat and irrefutable. Ron didn't waste time with condolences. He flipped through the stack, gave a slow nod, and leaned back in his leather chair. Carson, he said, voice like gravel and whiskey, you've got a fault-based divorce gift-wrapped. Don't waste energy on her feelings. The first rule is protection. Your assets, your livelihood, your reputation. I leaned forward, elbows on his desk. Tell me where to start. That's when he went into general mode, snapping orders, laying out strategy like battle plans. Change every password, bank, utilities, shop accounts. File a temporary injunction to keep her from touching joint funds. Pull her name off anything you legally can. You've got vehicles, titles? Reclaim what's yours. Move quick. Move quiet. I scribbled notes as fast as he talked. My mind, usually used to diagnosing carburetors and brake lines, was clicking into a different gear. This wasn't about feelings, it was about systems. Bolt tightening, leak stopping. Your shop, Ron continued, is your lifeblood. File to make sure she can't come after it. Same with your house. We'll lock them down under your name pending division. She stepped outside the marriage. That gives you leverage. Don't hesitate. I nodded, jaw set. Done. Within an hour of leaving his office, I was in the parking lot of the credit union, paperwork in hand. Changed online banking credentials, shifted auto-pay schedules, set up alerts on every account. From there, I drove to the DMV and signed the Honda back into my sole name. The clerk barely looked at me, just stamped the form and handed it back like it wasn't the difference between safety and disaster. By noon, I'd called my insurance rep, cut off her phone line from the business plan, and updated shop security codes. Each keystroke, each signed form felt like ratcheting a bolt tighter, dignity clicking into place. The only moment I slowed down was standing outside the shop, holding my phone. Natalie's number sat there in my contacts, name glowing up at me like it had all the power. My thumb hovered, but I didn't call. She'd made her decision. I wasn't wasting a second trying to negotiate with betrayal. Back in the office, I poured black coffee into a styrofoam cup and leaned back in my chair. My employees were out front, grease on their hands, laughter echoing through the bay. Business as usual. But behind the closed door, I was rewriting my life in real time. The strangest part? The calm. Anger was there, sure, boiling steady under the surface, but channeled, focused. Not wild, not flailing. Natalie thought she'd detonated me. Truth was, she'd only lit the fuse on a different version of me. One that wasn't willing to bend, one that would guard what he'd built with iron. Around 3, Ron called to check in. "Are you moving fast?" "Already done," I said. "House, shop, cars, bank. Locked down." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Good. Keep it that way. Now let her feel the vacuum. She's expecting you to stall, beg, argue. Instead, she'll hit a wall of closed doors. That's when she'll get sloppy, and that's when we'll strike." I hung up and looked around my office. Worn desk, grease-stained calendar. A clock that ticked louder than it should have. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every bolt, every late night, every busted knuckle had paid for it. No way was I letting her burn it down on her way out. By the time the sun dropped, I'd filed for fault-based divorce, citing adultery, with Ron Barrett listed as counsel of record. The papers were in motion. The system was grinding forward, and I was steering it. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen. The house still smelled faintly like burnt chicken. My coffee tasted metallic, but my mind was sharp. Natalie had chosen Hayden. I'd chosen survival. And if there's one thing I've learned from a lifetime under hoods and welding sparks, it's this: you protect the core first. Always. 3 days after I filed the papers, Natalie walked into my shop like nothing had changed. Hair curled, makeup tight, belly still flat enough to pass for regular. If you didn't know the truth, she came in with that soft damsel look, the one she used when she wanted me to carry in groceries or fix her mother's storm door. "My car's making a noise," she said, voice pitched just sweet enough for the crew out front to hear. "Hayden's truck is even worse. Could you maybe take a quick look?" I wiped my hands on a rag, grease streaking across already ruined denim, and gave her a stare that cut the performance short. My guys froze mid-motion. Even the radio seemed to quiet down. "No," I said flatly. Her eyes blinked wide. "What do you mean, no?" I folded the rag slowly, deliberately. "You chose Hayden. If he's twice the man I am, like you said, he can figure out a rattle. Google's free. You could have heard a socket wrench drop." The other mechanics pretended to be busy themselves, but I knew damn well they were listening. Natalie flushed crimson, shot me a glare meant to wound, then turned on her heel. The sound of her car door slamming carried like a gunshot across the lot. By closing time, half the bowling alley probably knew the story. Small towns don't run on electricity. They run on gossip. Sure enough, my phone lit up before I even locked the shop. Leanna Price, Natalie's loyal backup singer. Her texts came fast, full of moral lectures. How I owed Natalie kindness, how love was complicated, how real men didn't abandon women in need. I thumbed back one sentence. Real men don't abandon their vows, either. Then I shut the phone off. I didn't rage. I didn't throw anything. But inside, I felt the strangest mix of satisfaction and disgust. Satisfaction because I'd finally put a stop sign where everyone expected me to roll over. Disgust because she thought she could play me like a jukebox, feed me a sob story, and get the same old song. The next morning, when I walked into the shop, the guys nodded with that quiet respect mechanics give each other after a long day under a hood. No words needed. They'd seen me hold my ground. And in a town this size, that's the kind of thing that spreads faster than fire on dry grass. Later that week, I overheard two old-timers at the diner counter. One muttered, "Did you hear?" Carson told her no, told her flat out. The other chuckled, shook his head, and said, "About damn time." That night, for the first time since the folder, I slept like a man who'd stopped renting out his backbone. Natalie wanted to use history as currency, cashing in old memories for new favors. But history isn't store credit, and I wasn't her mechanic anymore. Word traveled fast. By the time I swung by my parents' place that Sunday, the story had already reached their porch. Mom met me at the door with a hug, eyes watery but steady. Dad was in his recliner, beer in hand, face set like poured concrete. "I never trusted the maintenance schedule on that girl," Dad grumbled without looking up from the game. That was his way of saying tell you so, and I've got your back rolled into one. Mom bustled into the kitchen, pulled out a casserole, and insisted I eat. She didn't press, didn't lecture, just gave me meatloaf and mercy. That was her language. Feed the body so the heart doesn't starve. My brother Elliot dropped by an hour later, fresh off a roofing job, arms sunburned, crowbar still in the truck bed. He slapped me on the shoulder hard enough to jar my ribs. "You want me to pay Hayden a visit? Because I've got free afternoons." I cracked a smile, the first real one in days. No crowbars. Not yet. We sat on the porch while cicadas screamed in the trees. Elliot talked more than I did. About nothing and everything, new tools, lousy customers, the weather. What mattered wasn't the words, but the weight lifted just by sitting there. Family doesn't erase betrayal, but it resets your spine. Reminds you what hasn't been poisoned. That week, I built a new rhythm. Early mornings at the shop, long afternoons on the bench press, evenings at home with silence that finally felt like mine. 10 pounds melted off, not from stress but from clarity. My head stopped buzzing. The fog cleared. Every night before bed, I'd sit with a notebook, scribble what I needed to do next, shop orders, legal tasks, workouts. Nothing fancy, just clean lists. Each checkmark was a reminder. I wasn't frozen, I was moving. By the end of the month, I looked in the mirror and saw a man sharper, leaner, harder than the one who'd clicked that cursed folder. Not broken, not begging, just stripped down to steel. Natalie had her chorus of enablers. I had mine, Mom's casseroles, Dad's grumbles, Elliot's crowbar jokes. And I chose their noise over hers every damn time. Stability isn't flashy. It doesn't make headlines. But when you've walked through betrayal, quiet becomes a kind of superpower. It was a Thursday evening when I spotted Leanna Price at the grocery store. She was pushing a cart with her latest +1. Some guy with gelled hair and a leather jacket that looked like it came off a clearance rack. She noticed me before I noticed her, smirked like she had ammunition, then leaned closer so I could catch her words. "You heard about Hayden?" she said, loud enough to carry. "Between jobs again." Poor Natalie had to cut back her hours at the dental office. Morning sickness, you know? She gave me that self-satisfied grin people wear when they think they've got the upper hand. Like I was supposed to crumble hearing how my ex-wife in everything but paper was struggling to play house with her nomad. I just nodded, dropped 2 cases of motor oil in my cart, and kept walking. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I opened it anyway, and there it was, Natalie's voice in text form, dripping with fake sunshine. "Hey Carson, just wanted you to know I'm doing really well. Hayden and I are planning a wedding after the baby comes. Everything's perfect. Perfect. Transparent as cellophane. People don't write victory speeches when they're winning. They write them when the scoreboard's ugly and they need an audience to believe otherwise." I didn't reply. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking at me, trying to get a rise, prove she hadn't bet on a busted horse. I tossed the phone on the counter and opened a beer. Sat in the quiet of my kitchen, boots up on the chair across from me. The hum of the fridge was steadier than her whole story. The next morning, I mentioned it to Elliot while we were changing brake pads. He snorted so hard he nearly dropped the caliper. Man, if life's so perfect, she wouldn't be broadcasting it. Happy people don't need an audience. Exactly, I said, tightening the bolt. That text wasn't for me. It was for her. Word kept trickling in through the grapevine, as it always does in towns like ours. Hayden missing shifts, Natalie picking up half-days when she wasn't too sick to stand, Leanna popping up in suspicious places. It all sounded less like paradise and more like a circus with bad ticket sales. Meanwhile, my shop was running smoothly. Engines in, engines out, money steady. My body felt lighter, my head clearer. I wasn't scrolling texts or chasing lies. I was sleeping through the night without waiting for the sound of a phone buzzing face down on the nightstand. Every fake update Natalie sent through back channels just confirmed what I already knew. Chaos doesn't keep. You can dress it up, you can stage it, you can even try to brag about it. But chaos always shows its rust. One evening, I caught myself laughing at the absurdity. Imagine throwing away stability for the thrill of being alive, only to end up broke, pregnant, and shuffling excuses through the grapevine. Passion's a hell of a drug, but it doesn't keep the lights on. I took another swig of beer and jotted down notes for the shop's expansion, new lifts, a second compressor, maybe even a fourth bay if business kept climbing. My future wasn't about proving her wrong anymore. It was about proving me right. Natalie could send all the texts she wanted. They'd dissolve in the air like exhaust fumes. My silence said more than any reply ever could. I was closing up shop when my phone rang. Elliot's name lit the screen. His voice came through fast, like he'd sprinted straight from the gossip line. "Carson, you're not gonna believe this. Hayden's been cheating on pregnant Natalie." He paused just long enough to twist the knife. "With Leanna Price. And guess where she caught M? Her own damn bed." For a second I just stood there, rag in hand, the shop lights buzzing overhead. Then I laughed, not the belly kind, just one sharp exhale, like an engine firing once before dying. "You serious?" "Dead serious," Elliot said. She walked in, he tossed her out, and got this. He's even questioning if the kid's his. Packed up and went straight to Leanna's. The whole town's buzzing like a hornet nest. I leaned against the workbench, grease under my nails, heart steady. I should have felt vindicated, maybe even triumphant. But all I felt was tired. Tired for the unborn kid, tired of watching grown adults mistake chaos for chemistry, tired of seeing people set their lives on fire and call it passion. It was grotesque, mechanical, inevitable, like a transmission seizing after you've ignored the rattles too long. Natalie had picked her paradise, and paradise had turned out to be a cheap motel fire with the sprinklers busted. I thought back to the texts about doing really well and wedding plans. That was just smoke, a cover for the fact that the whole house was already burning down. That night, I didn't bother telling my parents. They'd hear soon enough. I didn't drive by to gawk, didn't call to ask for details. I cracked open a beer, grilled a steak, and sat on my porch watching the sun drop behind the treeline. Somewhere across town, Natalie was dragging a suitcase down a driveway that wasn't hers anymore, and Hayden was congratulating himself on an upgrade that would rust twice as fast. I didn't need front row seats at the circus. I already knew how it ended. In flames, with everyone pretending they didn't smell the smoke until it was too late. The only thing I felt bad about, truly bad, was the kid. Born into a mess. Innocent, with two parents who thought lust was the same thing as loyalty. That little girl or boy would pay for decisions they never made. That part stung. But for the adults, they'd written their script. They could choke on it. When I turned in for the night, I didn't pray for them, didn't curse them, didn't waste another ounce of anger. I just lay there, arms behind my head, knowing one truth as solid as the bolts holding my truck together. Karma doesn't need choreography. It shows up right on schedule. 7 months pregnant, Natalie waddled across my lot one afternoon like she owned the pavement. The belly made her look smaller everywhere else, stripped of the angles she used to sharpen into weapons. She carried herself with a mix of exhaustion and entitlement, like she'd rehearsed the role of a fallen queen who just needed the right night to kneel. "Carson," she started, voice soft enough to fool someone who hadn't seen the play before. "I need a place, just until the baby comes. I thought maybe your spare room." Behind her words was desperation, but on the surface she tried to paint it as practical, reasonable. My spare room, her safety net. She framed it like we were still partners, like the months of lying, the folders, the gossip, and the spectacle had never happened. I kept my hands on the rag I was folding and looked her in the eye. You're asking me to house the man who isn't mine, raise the noise of a life you blew up, and call it compassion. What am I hearing? She bit her lip, swallowed, then reached for the one line she thought still had power. I was wrong, Carson. What we had, it was real, stable, good. I see that now. I nodded once. It was. Past tense. Her face cracked for a split second, then hardened. When soft didn't work, she tried sharp. This is your fault too, you know? If you'd paid more attention, if you hadn't been so obsessed with your shop, that was it. The mask dropped for good. I stepped closer, wiped my hands slowly, and spoke low enough that every word landed like steel. You're pregnant with another man's kid. You paraded me through betrayal like it was theater. And now you're blaming me because Hayden's truck broke down and Leanna's got better curtains? No, Natalie, not here. Not anymore. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but nothing came. Just air. I pointed toward the street. I feel for the child. That baby didn't ask for any of this. But my house, my peace, my future. Those aren't halfway houses for choices you refuse to own. Silence stretched out, long and raw. She shifted her weight, suitcase dragging at her side, belly pressing against the fabric of a shirt that used to fit better. For once, there was no backup chorus. No Leanna, no Hayden, just Natalie standing alone in the wreckage she built. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I didn't soften, either. I just turned, walked back into my shop, and let the bay door slam shut between us. Through the glass, I saw her standing there for a minute, then slowly walking away, suitcase wheels clicking against the gravel. Inside, the air smelled like oil and metal, steady and familiar. My place, my work, my life, and none of it belonged to her anymore. Months slip by the way they do when you're busy rebuilding instead of looking back. The grapevine kept feeding me updates whether I asked for them or not. Natalie had a baby girl, sweet, innocent, born into a storm she didn't deserve. Hayden drifted in and out between paychecks, and Leanna? She spun out of the picture like a bad tire, leaving him holding the bag half the time. I didn't chase the details. They reached me anyway, snippets at the diner, whispers at the gas pump. Every version carried the same headline. The paradise Natalie gambled on had collapsed under its own weight. Meanwhile, I was too busy to care. The shop picked up steady business, enough that I added new lifts and started sketching plans for a fourth bay. Evenings, I am filled with the kind of quiet you can only appreciate once you've survived chaos. Reading, lifting, grilling steaks without someone criticizing the seasoning. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I met Rachel Cole. She wasn't a girl playing dress-up with drama. She was a grown woman with calluses on her hands from real work and a way of treating fidelity like oxygen. Necessary, invisible, unquestioned. She didn't need rescuing. She didn't need fixing. She just showed up real, and for the first time in years, that was enough. Folks asked me if I regretted not helping more, if I felt guilty watching Natalie spiral while I rebuilt. My answer stayed the same every time. No, I didn't sign up to be Plan B. I didn't pour my sweat into a life just to become a safety net for someone else's choices. I gave her loyalty once. She traded it for chaos. That was her map, not mine. What I had now was better roads, a cleaner horizon, and the freedom to steer my own rig without passengers trying to grab the wheel. I thought back to that first night, the folder, the ultrasound, the 6 words that cracked my world open. Felt like the end. But standing here months later, boots on solid ground, grease under my nails, business thriving, peace in my house, I knew it was the beginning. I wasn't a victim of her story. I was the author of mine, and I'd written a life that read better every single day.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.